In a dusty middle school courtyard in rural Texas, a quiet new transfer student with a heavy Eastern European accent was about to face down a circle of jeering classmates. What started as a routine lunch break took a shocking turn when they came face to face with humiliation and cruelty. Aleksandr Sasha Vetrova wasn't your typical 8th grader. For 5 years, he had lived deep in the Carpathian Mountains, training with his ex-Special Forces uncle in isolation, known in whispers across villages for his unmatched discipline and hand-to-hand combat skills. When he heard a group of boys mocking his accent and pushing his tray to the ground, Sasha had no idea he was walking into danger or changing everything. He didn't retaliate with fists, but with a calm, practiced stare and a precise gesture that disarmed their aggression. Instantly, that moment of quiet defiance would lead to an unraveling none of them saw coming. What began as casual bullying would become a reckoning. The school and its small-town community would never be the same after discovering who Sasha Vetrova truly was. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The morning sun cast long shadows across the parking lot of Jefferson Ridge High School as Uncle Rico's weathered pickup truck rumbled to a stop. Luis Santiago sat in the passenger seat, his backpack positioned precisely between his feet, watching students stream through the main entrance like water finding its natural course. At 17, he had learned to read environments the way others read books quickly, thoroughly, and with an eye for danger. "Remember what I taught you, Mio," Rico said, his voice carrying the quiet authority of someone who had commanded respect in far more dangerous places than a Texas high school. His weathered hands gripped the steering wheel, knuckles bearing the faint scars of old conflicts. "Observe first, act second, and know the difference between a threat and a nuisance." Luis nodded, adjusting the collar of his pressed button-down shirt. While other students wore torn jeans and graphic tees, he dressed with the precision his uncle had instilled in him, neat, respectful, purposeful. "What if they don't leave me alone?" Rico's dark eyes met his nephew's in the rearview mirror. "Then you remember that discipline is not about avoiding conflict. It's about choosing when and how to engage it." He paused, studying Luce's reflection. "Your father would be proud of the man you're becoming." The mention of his father sent a familiar tightness through Luce's chest. 2 years had passed since the accident in San Juan, since the night that had changed everything and brought him to this moment. He pushed the memory down, compartmentalizing it the way Rico had taught him to handle pain. Acknowledge it, file it, move forward. "I'll see you at 1500 hours, Luis said, using the military time that had become natural in their household. 1500, Rico corrected gently. "You're not a soldier, Luis. You're a student. Don't forget that." Luis shouldered his backpack and stepped out into the humid Texas morning. The sounds of teenage life washed over him, laughter, shouting, the slam of car doors, the scrape of skateboard wheels on concrete. He moved through it all with the measured gait of someone who had learned to be invisible while remaining alert. The hallways of Jefferson Ridge were a maze of beige lockers and fluorescent lights, filled with the familiar chaos of teenagers navigating their social ecosystems. Luis found his locker, number 247, and opened it with practiced efficiency. Inside, he placed his lunch, carefully wrapped by Rico that morning, and took out his first period materials. "Excuse me," a voice said behind him. Luis turned to find a girl about his age, her dark hair pulled back in a neat ponytail, wearing a paint-stained art smock over her regular clothes. "You're new, right? I'm Marina Ortiz." "Luis Santiago," he replied, his accent lending a musical quality to the words that made Marina smile. "Puerto Rico?" she asked, and when he nodded, she continued, "My family's from Guadalajara. Been here 3 years now." There was something in her tone that suggested she understood the weight of starting over in a new place. Before Luis could respond, a voice cut through the hallway noise like a blade through silk. Well, what do we have here? Luis turned to see a tall, broad-shouldered boy approaching, flanked by two others. The leader had the easy confidence of someone who had never been told no, his letterman jacket announcing his status as clearly as a billboard. This was Tyler Greaves, though Luis didn't know his name yet. Behind him, a shorter boy with a cruel smile watched eagerly while another recorded with his phone. "New kid's got an accent," Tyler announced, his voice carrying just loud enough for nearby students to hear. "Say something else, amigo." "Let's hear that voice." Luis met Tyler's gaze steadily, recognizing the dynamic immediately. Alpha establishing dominance over perceived threat. Standard pack behavior. He said nothing, simply closed his locker and prepared to move to his first class. "I'm talking to you," Tyler said, stepping closer. "Didn't your mama teach you manners back in Mexico?" "Puerto Rico," Luis corrected quietly, his voice even and controlled. "And yes, she did." Chase Carter, the boy with the cruel smile, laughed. "Oh, he's got some fight in him. I like that." He pulled out his phone, beginning to record. "Say something else, Captain CrossFit. You look like you're about to salute." Luis studied the three boys with the kind of attention Rico had taught him to pay to potential threats. Tyler, insecure beneath the bravado, probably pressure from father figures. Needs constant validation. Chase, follower, coward without the group, uses cruelty to mask his own fears. The third boy, reluctant participant, might be turned if approached correctly. "I need to get to class," Luis said simply, moving to step around them. Tyler shifted to block his path. "What's the rush? We're just being friendly, welcoming you to Texas." His tone was mocking, designed to draw laughter from the growing crowd of onlookers. Marina stepped forward. "Come on, Tyler, leave him alone." "Oh, look," Chase said, his phone still recording. "He's already got a girlfriend. How sweet." Luis felt his jaw tightened slightly, but his expression remained neutral. Rule number 1, never let them see they've gotten to you. Rule number 2, document everything. He noted the time, the location, the witnesses. This wasn't random harassment, it was a deliberate power play. "Thank you," Luis said to Marina, his voice carrying genuine gratitude. Then to Tyler, "I hope you have a good day." He moved past them with the fluid grace of someone who had learned to navigate tight spaces under pressure. Behind him, he heard Tyler's frustrated voice. "That's it? That's all you've got to say?" Luis didn't turn around. He had learned long ago that some battles were won by walking away from them. The first period bell rang as Luis slid into his seat in a P history, 3 rows back and near the window, a position that allowed him to observe the entire classroom while maintaining a clear exit route. Old habits from a life that had required such considerations. Ms. Redding stood at the front of the room, her graying hair pulled back in a practical bun, her eyes sharp with the kind of intelligence that came from years of watching teenagers navigate their complicated worlds. She had been teaching for 15 years, and she had developed an instinct for sensing when a student was struggling. "Today we're discussing the concept of resistance movements in history," she began, her gaze sweeping the room. "Mr. Santiago, would you like to share any thoughts on how cultural identity plays a role in resistance?" Luis felt every eye in the room turn to him. In the back corner, Tyler and Chase exchanged glances, and he knew they were waiting for him to speak so they could mock his accent again. "I think," Luis said carefully, "that resistance often comes from people who have been underestimated. When others assume you're weak, you have the element of surprise." Ms. Redding nodded approvingly. "Excellent point. Can you give us a historical example?" "The Tano people of Puerto Rico," Luis continued, his voice growing stronger. "Spanish colonizers thought they were dealing with a primitive culture. They didn't understand that the Taino had complex social structures and strategic thinking. Their resistance lasted much longer than the Spanish expected. From the back of the room, Tyler's voice cut through the discussion. "Sounds like you know all about resistance, amigo." Several students snickered, and Luis felt the familiar tightness in his chest. Ms. Redding's expression sharpened. "Mr. Greaves, do you have something to contribute to our discussion about historical resistance movements?" Tyler shrugged, unrepentant. "Just saying it's interesting how some people are always fighting about something." Luis kept his expression neutral, but internally he was cataloging. Second incident. Public humiliation attempt. Teacher witness. He pulled out his notebook, and while appearing to take notes on the lesson, he began documenting. Day 1, period 1, 0847 hours. Tyler Greaves, Chase Carter. Verbal harassment, racial undertones. Ms. Redding present, but limited intervention. After class, Luis gathered his materials with the same precise efficiency he brought to everything. Marina approached his desk, her expression concerned. "You okay?" she asked quietly. Lise looked up, surprised by the genuine concern in her voice. "I'm fine, thank you for asking." "Tyler can be." She paused, searching for the right words. "He's got issues. Don't take it personally." "I don't," Luis replied, and he meant it. He had learned to separate personal attacks from strategic assessments. Tyler's behavior wasn't about Luis personally. It was about Tyler's need to maintain his position in the social hierarchy. Marina studied his face, noting the calm control in his expression. There was something about this new student that intrigued her. Most kids would have been angry or upset after Tyler's public mockery. Luis seemed almost analytical about it. "Where's your next class?" she asked. "Physical education," Luis replied, checking his schedule. Marina winced. "With Coach Bradley." "Tyler's in that class too." Luis nodded, filing away the information. "Thank you for the warning." As they walked through the hallways, Marina found herself stealing glances at Luis. He moved with an unusual awareness, his eyes constantly scanning their surroundings. When they passed a group of students, he seemed to automatically assess them. Threats or non-threats, allies or enemies. "You move like a soldier," she observed. Luis glanced at her, surprised by her perceptiveness. "My uncle was military. He taught me to be aware of my surroundings." "Is that why you're so calm?" "When Tyler was being a jerk, I mean." Luis considered his answer carefully. "My uncle taught me that reactions are choices. You can choose to let someone control your emotions, or you can choose to stay in control of yourself." Marina smiled. "I like that. Most guys would have tried to fight Tyler by now." "Fighting is easy," Luis replied. "It's also usually stupid." They reached the gymnasium, where Coach Bradley was already shouting instructions to students changing into their P uniforms. Luis headed toward the locker room, his mind already preparing for what he knew would be the next escalation. Inside the locker room, the familiar sounds of teenage boys echoed off the concrete walls. Laughter, insults, the clang of metal lockers. Luis found his assigned locker and began changing into his pay uniform with military precision. "Hey, look who's here," Chase's voice carried across the room. "It's our new friend from Puerto Rico." Luis continued changing, not acknowledging the comment. He had learned that responses only fed the fire. "I bet he's never seen a real football before," Tyler said, his voice deliberately loud. "They probably play soccer with coconuts down there." Several boys laughed, and Luis felt the familiar surge of anger that he had learned to channel into focus. He folded his street clothes with precise creases and placed them in his locker. "You know what I heard?" Chase continued, his phone now recording again. "I heard they eat weird food in Puerto Rico, like really weird stuff." Luis closed his locker and turned to face them. For a moment, the laughter died down as the other boys saw something in his expression, not anger, but a kind of cold assessment that made them uncomfortable. "Is there something you wanted to ask me?" Louise said quietly. Tyler, emboldened by his audience, stepped closer. "Yeah, actually, what's with the accent? You sound like you're trying to order food at a drive-thru." More laughter, but Louise noticed that some of the boys looked uncomfortable now. The mockery was becoming crueler, more personal. "This is my voice," Louise replied simply. "I'm not changing it for anyone." "Oh, tough guy," Chase said, still recording. "What are you gonna do if we don't like your voice?" Louise looked directly into the camera, his expression calm and steady. "Nothing. You have the right to your opinion." The simplicity of his response seemed to deflate some of the energy in the room. Tyler had been expecting anger, defiance, something he could use to justify escalating the confrontation. Instead, Louise had given him nothing to work with. "Whatever," Tyler muttered, turning away. "Let's go." As the other boys filed out toward the gymnasium, Louise remained behind for a moment, taking out his notebook again. Day 1, Period 2, 0955 hours. Locker room. Tyler Greaves, Chase Carter. Recorded harassment, cultural mockery. Audience of approximately 8 students. No adult supervision. He closed the notebook and headed toward the gym, where Coach Bradley was setting up for dodgeball. Louise had never played the game before, but he understood the concept immediately. Controlled violence disguised as sport. This was going to be interesting. The gymnasium smelled of sweat, rubber, and the institutional cleaning products that never quite masked the underlying odors of teenage athletics. Louise stood in the back row as Coach Bradley explained the rules of dodgeball, his voice echoing off the high ceiling like a drill sergeant addressing recruits. "Simple rules," Bradley barked, his whistle dangling from his neck like a badge of authority. "You get hit, you're out. You catch a ball, the thrower's out, and you can bring back a teammate. Last team standing wins." Louise observed the team selection process with the analytical eye his uncle had taught him to apply to every situation. Tyler, naturally, was chosen as a team captain. The social hierarchy of the school played out in miniature as the popular kids were selected first, followed by the athletes, then the average students, and finally the outcasts. Louise was chosen last, which didn't surprise him. He was the unknown variable in their carefully calibrated social equation. "All right, newbie," Tyler called out as Louise joined his team. "Try not to embarrass us too much." The opposing team was led by Marcus Williams, a senior who played varsity basketball and had the kind of quiet confidence that came from actual skill rather than manufactured bravado. Louise noticed how Marcus assessed each player, already strategizing about targeting patterns and defensive positions. When the whistle blew, chaos erupted. Rubber balls flew across the gymnasium like artillery shells, and students dove, ducked, and weaved with varying degrees of success. Louise moved with a fluid grace that caught several students off guard, dodging throws that seemed impossible to avoid. "Look at Captain CrossFit go," Chase shouted from the sidelines after being eliminated. Early, his phone was out again, recording Louise's movements. Louise caught a ball thrown by Marcus with both hands, the rubber sphere smacking into his palms with a satisfying thud. The opposing team's best player was out, and Louise's team erupted in cheers. "Not bad, Puerto Rico," Tyler admitted grudgingly. But Louise could see the competitive fire in his eyes intensifying. As the game progressed, Louise became increasingly aware that he was being watched, not just by his teammates, but by students on the sidelines who were supposed to be eliminated. His movements were too smooth, too controlled. He was avoiding balls that other students couldn't even see coming. Too visible, he thought, deliberately allowing the next throw to graze his shoulder. Need to blend in better. He joined the eliminated players on the sidelines, where Marina was sitting cross-legged on the floor, having been knocked out early in the game. "You move like a dancer," she observed quietly. "Or maybe like a fighter." "Louise," glanced at her, surprised by her perceptiveness. I just played a lot of sports back home. What kind of sports? Marina asked, her artistic eye still studying his movements even as he sat still. Baseball mostly. Some martial arts. Martial arts? Marina's eyebrows rose. Like karate? Luis hesitated. How could he explain that his uncle had taught him Krav Maga, combat techniques designed for real-world violence, not sport? That his training had included weapons disarmament and psychological warfare? Something like that, he said finally. The game ended with Tyler's team victorious, largely due to Luz's early contributions. As students headed back to the locker room, Luis noticed that his backpack had been moved. It was a small thing, shifted perhaps 6 inches from where he had left it, but he had learned to notice small things. Inside the locker room, he opened his backpack with careful attention. Everything was still there, but the arrangement was wrong. Someone had been through his belongings, looking for something. Tyler's voice came from behind him. Luis turned, his expression carefully neutral. Just checking I have everything for next period. What's this? Chase appeared at Tyler's shoulder, holding up a photograph that had been tucked inside Luz's history textbook. Luz's blood ran cold. The photograph showed him at 12 years old, standing next to his father in military dress uniform. Behind them, the Puerto Rican flag hung alongside the American flag in what was clearly a military ceremony. Well, Tyler said, examining the photograph. Looks like our friend here has some military connections. Is that your dad? Chase asked, his voice carrying a mocking tone. He looks pretty serious. Luis reached for the photograph, but Tyler pulled it back. Not so fast. This is interesting. Your old man's in the army? Was, Luis said quietly. He's dead. The simple statement hung in the air like a challenge. Several boys who had been listening from nearby lockers went quiet, and even Chase looked momentarily uncomfortable. But Tyler, sensing vulnerability, pressed forward. Sorry for your loss, man, but this explains a lot. All that weird discipline. Stuff the way you stand. You think you're a soldier, don't you? Luis felt the familiar tightness in his chest, but this time it was different. This wasn't just about him anymore. They were mocking his father's memory, his father's service. Give me the photograph, Luis said, his voice carrying a new edge. That made several students step back. Tyler smiled, recognizing that he had finally found a pressure point. I don't think so. I think this is really interesting. Maybe I'll share it with the class. He pulled out his phone and took a picture of the photograph, then handed the original back to Luis with exaggerated courtesy. There you go, soldier boy. Thanks for sharing. Luis took the photograph, his hand steady despite the rage building inside him. He looked at his father's face, remembering the man who had taught him about honor, about protecting those who couldn't protect themselves. Control. He heard Rico's voice in his head. Anger without discipline is just chaos. You don't know anything about my father, Luis said quietly, or about me. I know enough, Tyler replied, his confidence growing. I know you think you're something special because Daddy was in the army. But you're not. You're just another immigrant trying to fit in. Luis closed his eyes for a moment, centering himself the way Rico had taught him. When he opened them, his expression was calm again, but there was something different in his gaze now. Something that made Tyler unconsciously take a step back. You're right, Luis said simply. I am trying to fit in. Thank you for reminding me that some people make that impossible. He finished changing, placed the photograph safely back in his backpack, and headed toward the door. But before leaving, he turned back to Tyler. That photograph was taken at my father's medal ceremony, he said quietly. He was being honored for saving his entire unit during combat in Afghanistan. He died protecting people like you. The locker room had gone completely silent. Even Tyler seemed momentarily at a loss for words. Luis left without saying anything else, but as he walked through the hallways toward his next class, He pulled out his notebook and made another entry. Day 1, period 2, 10:45 hours. Locker room. Personal belongings searched without permission. Photograph of deceased father used. For harassment. Tyler Greaves, Chase Carter. Escalation to personal family attacks. He closed the notebook and continued walking, but his mind was already working through scenarios. This was no longer just about surviving high school. This was about protecting his father's memory and his own dignity. And Luis Santiago was very good at protecting things that mattered to him. The art classroom was a sanctuary of creative chaos, with half-finished paintings lining the walls and the smell of acrylic paint mixing with the afternoon. Sunlight streaming through tall windows. Luis found himself seated next to Marina, who was working on a vibrant landscape that seemed to capture the essence of home, wherever that might be for someone caught between cultures. "You don't talk much," Marina observed, her brush moving in confident strokes across the canvas. "But you watch everything." Luis glanced up from his own work, a careful study of shadows and light that revealed more technical skill than most students possessed. "My uncle says that listening tells you more than talking." Smart uncle. Marina paused, studying Luis's face. "You know, I've been dealing with comments about my accent since I was 14. Kids making jokes about my family, assuming things about where I come from." Luis set down his brush, giving her his full attention. "How do you handle it?" "At first, I tried to change myself. Practice speaking like everyone else. Avoided talking about my culture." Marina's voice carried the weight of old wounds. "But then I realized that's exactly what they wanted, for me to disappear, to become invisible. And now I speak up. Not just for myself, but for kids like my little brother who are coming behind me. Someone has to show them it's okay to be proud of who you are." Luis considered her words carefully. In his world of tactical thinking and strategic restraint, Marina represented something different: open resistance instead of quiet endurance. "What if speaking up makes things worse?" he asked. Marina looked at him directly, her dark eyes serious. "Luis, things are already bad. Tyler and his crew aren't going to stop because you're polite. They're going to keep pushing until someone pushes back." Before Luis could respond, Ms. Redding appeared beside their table, carrying a slim volume of poetry. "Mr. Santiago, I thought you might appreciate this," she said, placing the book next to his painting. "It's by Juan Felipe Herrera. He writes about the experience of being between cultures." Luis picked up the book, reading the title, "Half the World in Light." "Thank you, Ms. Redding. Poetry can be a form of resistance too," she said quietly, her words carrying more weight than their simple meaning suggested. "Sometimes the most powerful response is to refuse to be silenced." Telling and preparing this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. As Miss Redding moved away, Luis opened the book to a random page. The words that met his eyes seemed to speak directly to his situation. "They want to make you small, to fit their narrow definitions. But you are vast as the ocean, deep as the mountain roots." Marina leaned over to read the passage. "See? Even poets know that saying small isn't the answer." Luis closed the book thoughtfully. "My uncle taught me that the best battles are won without fighting." "Maybe," Marina said, cleaning her brush with deliberate care. "But sometimes not fighting is just another way of losing." Their conversation was interrupted by a commotion near the classroom door. Emma Dawson, a quiet girl who usually kept to herself, was standing in the hallway looking distressed. Through the open door, Luis could see Tyler and Chase approaching. Their body language predatory. "Hey Emma," Tyler's voice carried into the art room. "Heard you were hanging out with the new kid. Getting a little desperate, are we?" Emma's face flushed red. We weren't." "It's okay," Chase laughed, his phone already recording. "We all know you're not exactly swimming in options, but really, The Puerto Rican kid? Luis stood up from his table, his movement fluid and controlled. Marina grabbed his arm. Luis, don't. I'm just going to talk to them, he said, his voice carrying that familiar calm that somehow made Marina more worried. Not less. Luis walked to the doorway, positioning himself slightly behind and to the left of Emma, a protective stance that looked casual but allowed him to intervene if necessary. Emma, he said quietly, Ms. Redding wanted to see your portfolio. It was a lie, but it gave Emma an escape route. She looked at him gratefully and hurried back into the classroom. Tyler turned his attention to Luis, his eyes lighting up with the prospect of a more interesting target. Well, Captain CrossFit to the rescue. I was just letting her know. About the portfolio, Luis replied evenly. Sure you were. Tyler stepped closer, invading Luz's personal space in a way that was clearly meant to intimidate. You know what I think? I think you're trying to collect the losers, building yourself a little army of misfits. Luis didn't step back, but he didn't move forward either. His posture remained relaxed, hands at his sides, but Marina noticed the slight shift in his stance, weight balanced, ready to move in any direction. I think you should go to class, Luis said simply. Chase laughed. Or what? You'll report us to your daddy? Oh wait, you can't. He's dead. The words hit Luis like a physical blow, but his expression didn't change. Behind him, he heard Marina's sharp intake of breath and the scrape of chairs as other students in the art room turned to watch. Yes, Luis said quietly. He is. Something in his tone made Tyler pause. There was no anger, no hurt, just a statement of fact delivered with the kind of finality that suggested the conversation was over. Come on, Tyler, Chase said, suddenly uncomfortable. We're gonna be late for Hawkins's class. Tyler hesitated, as if he wanted to push further, but something in Luz's steady gaze made him reconsider. This isn't over, soldier boy. It never was, Luis replied, watching them walk away. When he returned to his seat, Marina was staring at him with a mixture of admiration and concern. You okay? Luis picked up his brush and returned to his painting. My father used to say that. Bullies are like dogs, they can smell fear. But they can also sense when someone isn't afraid of them. And you're not afraid of them? Luis paused, considering the question. I'm not afraid of Tyler, but I am afraid of what I might do if he keeps pushing. Marina looked at him sharply. What do you mean? Nothing, Luis said, but his grip on the brush had tightened. I just mean that everyone has limits. The cafeteria at Jefferson Ridge High was a carefully orchestrated chaos of teenage social dynamics. Luis sat at a corner table with Marina, picking at the lunch Rico had prepared, Era's con palo that smelled like home and memories. Around them, the usual soundtrack of adolescent life played out. Laughter, gossip, the clatter of plastic trays. Luis had been documenting patterns for 2 weeks now. Tyler's group operated on a schedule. They targeted him most aggressively on Tuesdays and Fridays, usually during lunch or between classes when the audience was largest. Today was Friday. You're doing it again, Marina observed, following his gaze as he scanned the cafeteria. Doing what? That thing where you analyze everyone like you're planning a military operation. Luis smiled slightly. Rico says situational awareness is a survival skill. This is high school, not combat. Sometimes it's hard to tell the difference. Marina was about to respond when the familiar sound of Tyler's laughter cut through the cafeteria noise. Luis didn't turn around, but he could feel the group approaching from behind Tyler. Chase, and 2 other football players he'd identified as occasional participants. Well, if it isn't our favorite immigrant, Tyler announced, his voice pitched to carry across nearby tables. Having lunch with your girlfriend? Luis continued eating, his movements deliberate and unhurried. Marina, this is Tyler Greaves, Tyler Marina Ortiz. The formal introduction caught Tyler off guard. He'd been expecting fear or anger, not politeness. Real funny. Tyler recovered. What's for lunch today? Tacos? Arroz con palo, Luis replied. Matter-of-factly, my uncle made it. Chase leaned over Luz's shoulder, his phone recording. Looks weird, man. What is that, like Mexican food? Puerto Rican, Luz corrected, taking another bite. Same thing, Tyler said dismissively. All that spicy food. No wonder you people are so what? Marina interrupted, her voice sharp. With anger Luz had never heard from her before. Tyler grinned, sensing he'd found another pressure point. So emotional. Always getting worked up about stuff. Luis set down his fork and looked directly at Tyler. Is there something you needed? Yeah, actually. Tyler reached over and flicked Luz's water bottle, sending it rolling across the table. I need you to understand something about how things work here. The cafeteria had grown quieter, students at nearby tables turning to watch the confrontation. Luis calmly retrieved his water bottle and set it back in its place. And what's that? He asked. That you don't belong here. Tyler's voice had dropped to a more serious tone. You can try to fit in, try to make friends, but everyone knows what you are. What am I? Tyler smiled, but there was no humor in it. You're a charity case, a project, someone to feel sorry for. Luis felt Marina tense beside him, but he kept his expression neutral. Thank you for explaining that to me. The calm response seemed to frustrate Tyler. You know what? I don't think you get it. Without warning, he grabbed Luz's lunch tray and flipped it, sending rice, chicken, and beans across the table, and onto Luz's lap. The cafeteria erupted in gasps and nervous laughter. Luz looked down at his ruined lunch, then at the stain spreading across his shirt. He stood slowly, brushing rice from his clothes with careful, precise movements. Oops, Tyler said with mock concern. Sorry about that. Guess you'll have to eat the free lunch today. Luis began cleaning up the mess, his movements economical and purposeful. Marina started to help, but he shook his head slightly. I've got it. Aren't you going to do something? Chase taunted, his phone capturing every moment. Or are you just going to clean it up like a good little janitor? Luis gathered the scattered food onto the tray, then walked calmly to the trash can. The entire cafeteria watched in silence as he disposed of his ruined lunch and returned to the table. Thank you, he said to Tyler, his voice carrying across the quiet room. Tyler blinked, confused. What? Thank you for the lesson. Luis picked up his backpack and slung it over his shoulder. I learned something important today. Yeah, what's that? Luis looked directly into Tyler's eyes, and for a moment, something flickered there, something cold and calculating that made Tyler take an involuntary step back. I learned that you're exactly what I thought you were. He walked away, leaving Tyler standing in the middle of the cafeteria, looking somehow smaller than before. The crowd began to disperse, but Luz could feel their eyes on him, their whispered conversations following him into the hallway. Marina caught up with him outside the cafeteria. Luis, wait. He stopped, turning to face her. I'm fine, Marina. No, you're not. That was humiliating. And Tyler recorded the whole thing. Luz shrugged. Let him post it. It won't change anything. It'll change everything. People will see it. They'll see exactly what Tyler wanted them to see. Luz interrupted. Someone who doesn't fight back when attacked. Marina studied his face, noting the tension in his jaw, the controlled set of his shoulders. Is that what you want them to see? Luz was quiet for a long moment. For now, what does that mean? It means, Luz said, his voice carrying a weight that made Marina shiver, that Tyler thinks he's winning. And sometimes the best strategy is to let your enemy think they're winning until you're ready to show them they're not. Marina felt a chill run down her spine. Luis, what are you planning? But Luis was already walking away, leaving her standing alone in the hallway with the uncomfortable feeling that she had just glimpsed something in him that was far more dangerous. than Tyler could possibly imagine. Monday morning arrived with the cruel efficiency of a military alarm clock. Luis stood before his locker, staring at the destruction that awaited him. The metal door hung open, its lock broken, contents scattered. Across the hallway floor, his textbooks had been torn, pages scattered like confetti. His notebooks, including the one where he'd been documenting incidents, were soaked with what smelled like chocolate milk, but it was the words spray-painted across the inside of his locker that made his jaw tighten. Go back to Mexico, Spick. Students walked past, some stopping to stare, others quickly averting their eyes. Luis could feel their discomfort, their relief that they weren't the target, their curiosity about how he would respond. He knelt down and began gathering his ruined belongings with the same methodical precision he brought to everything else. A torn photograph caught his eye, the one of him and his father at the medal ceremony. Someone had drawn devil horns on his father's head. "Oh my God," Marina's voice came from behind him. "Luis, I'm so sorry." He picked up the defaced photograph, studying it with the calm attention he might give to a tactical map. "It's just paper," he said quietly. "No, it's not. It's your father." Luis stood, the photograph in his hand, and turned to face the growing crowd of students. His eyes found Tyler immediately, standing near the opposite wall with Chase and their crew, phones out and recording. "You're right," Luis said, his voice carrying clearly across the hallway. "It's my father." He walked directly toward Tyler, the crowd parting before him like water. His movement was fluid, purposeful, and something in his gait made several students step back instinctively. "Did you do this?" Luis asked, holding up the photograph. Tyler's smirk faltered slightly. "Do what? This?" Luis held the photograph higher. "Did you draw on my father's face?" "I don't know what you're talking about." Luis nodded slowly, as if Tyler's response had confirmed something he already knew. "Of course you don't." He turned to address the crowd of students, his voice calm but carrying clearly. "My father was killed in Afghanistan 3 years ago. He was protecting soldiers who were someone's sons, someone's brothers. He died because he believed in protecting people who couldn't protect themselves." The hallway had gone completely silent. Even Tyler seemed unsure how to respond. "Someone," Luis continued, "thought it would be funny to draw on his face, to vandalize his memory." He looked directly at Tyler. "Someone thought my father's sacrifice was a joke." Tyler's face had gone pale. "Look, man, I didn't." "You didn't what?" Luis stepped closer. "You didn't think about the consequences? You didn't think about what it means to disrespect a dead soldier? I didn't draw on your stupid picture." "No," Luis agreed. "You just broke into my locker. You just destroyed my belongings. You just created the environment where someone felt comfortable doing this." He held up the photograph again, and Luis could see some students looking genuinely ashamed. "But you know what?" Luis continued. "Thank you," Tyler blinked. "What?" "Thank you for showing everyone exactly who you are. Thank you for proving that you have no honor, no respect, no basic human decency." Luis's voice remained calm, but there was something in his tone that made Tyler take a step back. "Thank you for confirming everything I suspected about you." Luis turned and walked back to his locker, leaving Tyler standing in the middle of the hallway looking somehow diminished. But as he began gathering his things again, he heard Tyler's voice, desperate to regain control. "You think you're better than me?" Tyler called out. "You think being a victim makes you special?" Luis straightened slowly, and when he turned back to face Tyler, something had changed in his expression. The calm was still there, but underneath it was something else, something that made Marina grab his arm. "I think," Luis said quietly, "that you have no idea what you're dealing with." "Yeah? What's that supposed to mean?" Luis smiled, and it was the first time most students had seen him smile. It wasn't a pleasant expression. "It means that you've mistaken discipline for weakness. You've mistaken restraint for cowardice." And you've mistaken silence for surrender. He walked closer to Tyler, close enough that only Tyler could hear his next words. It means that you've been pushing someone who's been trained to push back. And you have no idea what that looks like. Tyler's face went white. Are you threatening me? No, Louis said, his voice carrying clearly again. I'm educating you. There's a difference. He gathered the last of his belongings and walked away, leaving Tyler standing in the hallway with the uncomfortable feeling that something fundamental had just shifted. As Louise passed Marina, she fell into step beside him. Louise, what just happened back there? I decided to stop pretending, he said simply. Pretending what? Louise stopped walking and looked at her directly. Pretending that I'm just another high school student. Pretending that I'm helpless. Pretending that I don't know exactly how to handle bullies like Tyler. Marina felt a chill run down her spine. What are you going to do? I'm going to do what my uncle taught me to do. Luz's expression was calm again, but there was something in his eyes that hadn't been there before. I'm going to win. The transformation was subtle at first, so gradual that most students didn't notice it happening. But Louis had learned patience from his uncle, and patience was a weapon more powerful than any physical confrontation. It started in a history. When Tyler made his usual mockery about Luz's accent during a discussion about immigration, Luz didn't ignore it. Instead, he turned to face Tyler directly. You make a good point about the challenges of cultural integration, Louis said, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had actually lived the experience. But you're confusing legal immigration with refugee displacement. The distinction matters when we're discussing policy implications. Ms. Redding's eyebrows rose in appreciation. Excellent clarification, Mr. Santiago. Mr. Greaves, would you like to respond to that distinction? Tyler's mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. He clearly hadn't expected to be drawn into an actual intellectual discussion. That's not what I meant, he stammered. What did you mean? Louis asked, his tone genuinely curious rather than confrontational. The question hung in the air like a challenge. Tyler had built his reputation on quick insults and crowd-pleasing mockery, not on defending his positions in academic debate. Nothing, Tyler muttered. Forget it. Louise nodded and turned back to Ms. Redding. As I was saying, the economic impact of immigration varies significantly depending on the region and the skill level of the immigrant population. He continued with a detailed analysis that demonstrated not only his intelligence, but his deep understanding of the very issues Tyler had been mocking. Several students took notes, and Ms. Redding smiled approvingly. After class, Marina caught up with Louise in the hallway. That was brilliant, she said. You made him look like an idiot without even trying. I wasn't trying to make him look like anything, Louise replied. I was just answering the question. But Marina could see the slight smile playing at the corners of his mouth. The pattern continued throughout the week. In English class, when Chase made a snide comment about Luz's essay on cultural identity, Luz responded by quoting extensively from James Baldwin and Gloria Anzaldúa, demonstrating a literary knowledge that left Chase scrambling to understand the references. You know, Louis said after finishing his quote, Baldwin wrote about the experience of being seen as other in your own country. It's interesting how his observations from the 1960s still apply today. Mrs. Patterson, the English teacher, looked impressed. That's a sophisticated connection, Mr. Santiago. Have you read The Fire next time? Yes, ma'am. Along with Borderlands by Anzaldúa and How the Garcia Girls Lost Their Accents by Alvarez. There's a fascinating conversation between these authors about language, identity, and belonging. Chase looked like he was trying to solve a complex math problem. Who? Authors, Louis replied simply. People who write books. The laughter that followed wasn't directed at Louise this time. By Thursday, the dynamic had shifted noticeably. Students began looking to Louise for answers in class discussions. His calm intelligence had earned him a respect that Tyler's bullying had never achieved. But Louis wasn't content with academic victories. He had learned from his uncle that psychological warfare was about more than just intelligence. It was about exposing your opponent's weaknesses while concealing your own strengths. During lunch, he began sitting with different groups of students, learning their stories, understanding their perspectives. He discovered that Emma Dawson was an aspiring writer who had been too intimidated to share her work. He found out that Marcus Williams, the basketball player, was struggling with his college applications. "You know," Louis told Emma during art class, "there's a young writers group that meets at the library on Saturdays. Ms. Redding mentioned it." Emma's face lit up. "Really? You think I should go?" "I think you have a unique voice," Louis replied. "And unique voices deserve to be heard." To Marcus, he offered help with his college essays. "I went through the process last year," he explained. "I know what admissions officers look for." What Louis didn't mention was that he had learned about psychological profiling from his uncle, who had used similar techniques to build networks of allies in hostile environments. The effect was subtle but powerful. Students began gravitating toward Louis, seeking his advice, his perspective, his calm presence. He became a natural leader not through domination, but through competence and genuine care for others. Tyler watched this transformation with growing unease. His own circle of followers began to seem smaller, less significant. When he made his usual jokes, fewer people laughed. When he tried to assert his dominance, students would glance toward Louis as if seeking a second opinion. The breaking point came during a group project in chemistry class. Tyler, accustomed to being chosen as team leader by default, found himself passed over in favor of Louis, who had quietly demonstrated his superior knowledge of the subject. "This is ridiculous," Tyler muttered as Louis organized the team's approach to their assignment. "Since when do we take orders from the new kid?" "Since the new kid actually knows what he's doing," replied Jessica, a girl who had previously been part of Tyler's inner circle. "Louis, what were you saying about the reaction rates?" Tyler's face flushed red, but Louis simply continued with his explanation, treating Tyler's outburst as if it hadn't happened. After class, Tyler cornered Louis in the hallway. "What's your game?" he demanded. "I don't play games," Louis replied calmly. "Bullshit. You're trying to turn everyone against me." Louis studied Tyler's face, noting the tension around his eyes, the defensive posture, the desperation in his voice. "I'm not trying to turn anyone against you, Tyler. I'm just being myself." "Your accent's gone," Tyler said suddenly. "You talk different now," Louis smiled. "My accent was never gone. You just started listening to what I was saying instead of how I was saying it." Tyler stared at him, and for the first time, Louis saw something like fear in his eyes. "What are you?" "I'm exactly what I've always been," Louis replied. "You just finally noticed." As Tyler walked away, Louis pulled out his notebook and made a final entry. Week 3, Day 4. Target destabilized. Psychological dominance established. Ready for final phase. The cafeteria hummed with its usual chaotic energy, but Louis could sense the subtle shift in the atmosphere. Students who had once avoided eye contact now nodded respectfully as he passed. Conversations paused as he walked by, not out of fear, but out of genuine interest in what he might have to say. He sat at his usual table with Marina, who had become his closest ally in the campaign he had never officially declared. Across the room, Tyler sat with his diminished circle of followers, his body language tense and watchful. "He's planning something," Marina observed, following Louis's gaze. "I know," Louis replied, taking a careful bite of his sandwich. "He's running out of options. What do you think he'll do?" Louis considered the question with the tactical mind his uncle had trained. "He'll try to recreate his moment of triumph. The lunch tray incident gave him his biggest victory, so he'll try to duplicate it. And you're ready for that?" Luis reached into his backpack and withdrew a small device that looked like a pen. Voice recorder, he explained. Rico taught me. That documentation is everything in warfare. Marina stared at the device. You think this is war? Tyler made it war the moment he chose to target me instead of leaving me alone. As if summoned by their conversation, Tyler stood from his table, his movements deliberate and purposeful. Chase and two other football players flanked him as he crossed the cafeteria, their formation designed to intimidate. Here we go, Luis murmured, activating the recorder. Tyler stopped directly in front of Luce's table, his presence commanding attention from nearby students. Phones appeared as if by magic, students sensing that something significant was about to happen. You know what I think? Tyler announced, his voice carrying across the cafeteria. I think our friend Luis here has been playing us all along. Luis looked up from his lunch, his expression mildly curious. Playing you how? Acting all innocent, all disciplined. But I did some research. Tyler's smile was predatory. I know. About your uncle. I know about your training. A murmur ran through the cafeteria. Luis felt Marina tense beside him, but his own expression remained calm. What about my uncle? Luis asked. Rico Santiago, former Special Forces. Dishonorably discharged. For excessive force. Tyler's voice dripped with satisfaction. Guess it runs in the family. The lie hung in the air like a poison cloud. Luis felt a familiar tightness in his chest, but this time it wasn't anger, it was clarity. That's interesting, Luis said quietly. Tell me more about this research. Tyler, emboldened by the attention, continued his attack. I think you've been planning this whole thing. The quiet act, the good student routine. You're just waiting for the right moment to snap. Snap and do what? What your people do, Tyler said, his voice carrying ugly implications. Violence, that's all you understand. Luis stood slowly, his movement fluid and controlled. The cafeteria fell silent, hundreds of eyes focused on the confrontation. Tyler, Luis said, his voice carrying clearly across the room. I want you to do something for me. What? I want you to try to knock over my lunch tray. Tyler blinked, confused. What? You heard me. Reach over and knock over my lunch tray. Like you did 3 weeks ago. Tyler looked around, sensing a trap but unable to identify it. Why would I do that? Because, Luis said, his voice growing stronger, I want everyone to see what happens. When you try. Tyler's hand moved toward the lunch tray, but something in Luce's posture made him hesitate. Luis stood perfectly balanced, his weight distributed evenly, his hands relaxed but ready. Go ahead, Luis encouraged, just like last time. Tyler reached for the tray, but as his hand made contact, Luis moved. His own hand shot out, not to strike, but to grip Tyler's wrist with controlled precision. Tyler found himself frozen, unable to move his arm in any direction. Interesting, Luis said conversationally, his grip holding Tyler in place effortlessly. You can't seem to finish what you started. Let go of me, Tyler said, his voice strained. In a moment. Luis looked around the cafeteria, addressing the crowd that had gathered. 3 weeks ago, Tyler knocked over my lunch and humiliated me in front of all of you. I cleaned it up and walked away. Do you know why? The cafeteria was silent. Because I was gathering evidence. Every insult, every threat, every act of vandalism. I documented it all. Luce's voice carried the authority of someone who had never doubted his eventual victory. Time, date, witnesses. I have video, audio, and written testimony. He released Tyler's wrist, and Tyler stumbled backward, rubbing his arm. But more importantly, Luis continued, I was waiting for Tyler to reveal who he really is. Not just to me, but to all of you. Tyler's face was flushed with embarrassment and rage. You're crazy. Am I? Luis pulled out his phone, swiped to a video file, and held it up for the crowd to see. This is Tyler 3 days ago, talking about how he's going to put the Puerto Rican freak in his place. This is Chase planning to vandalize my locker. This is evidence of systematic harassment and hate speech. The crowd murmured, students craning their necks to see the phone screen. You recorded us? Tyler's voice cracked. I recorded you committing crimes, Luis corrected. Harassment, vandalism, destruction of property. All of it documented with timestamps and witnesses. Tyler looked around desperately, seeking support from his followers, but found only uncomfortable silence. Here's what's going to happen, Luis continued, his voice calm and professional. This evidence is going to the principal, to the school board, and to the police. Your football scholarship is going to disappear. Your college applications are going to be flagged. Your future is going to be shaped by the choices you made when you decided to target me. You can't do this, Tyler said, his voice barely above a whisper. I already have. Luis looked directly into Tyler's eyes. You made this about power, Tyler. You wanted to dominate me, to make me submit. But you made one critical mistake. What? Luis smiled, and it was the smile of someone who had won a war without firing a shot. You assumed I didn't know how to fight back. The principal's office at Jefferson Ridge High had never hosted a meeting quite like this one. Principal Martinez, a stern woman with graying hair and sharp eyes, sat behind her desk reviewing the evidence that Luz had methodically compiled over the past 3 weeks. The folder was thick with printed screenshots, transcribed audio recordings, and witness statements. This is comprehensive, she said, looking up at Luis, who sat calmly in the chair across from her desk. Uncle Rico sat beside him, his military bearing evident even in civilian clothes, while Ms. Redding occupied the third chair, her expression grave but supportive. Luis is very thorough, Rico said, his voice carrying the quiet pride of someone who had taught his nephew well. I've raised him to document everything and think strategically. Principal Martinez nodded, then looked back at the evidence. The harassment pattern is clear. The escalation from verbal abuse to property destruction to hate speech. She paused at a particular page. The vandalism of your locker was particularly egregious. The racial slur was photographed and reported by 3 different students. What will happen to Tyler and his group? Ms. Redding asked. Given the severity and documented nature of these incidents, I have no choice but to recommend suspension. Pending a full investigation, the school board will review the case, and depending on their findings, expulsion is possible. Principal Martinez's voice was firm. We have a zero-tolerance policy for hate speech and systematic harassment. Luis remained silent, but Rico placed a hand on his nephew's shoulder. How does Luis feel about this outcome? Principal Martinez turned to Luis. Mr. Santiago, you've shown remarkable restraint throughout this ordeal. Many students would have responded with violence. Instead, you chose to work within the system. That takes real strength. My uncle taught me that the strongest response is often the most disciplined one, Luis replied. Violence would have made me part of the problem, not the solution. And now? Principal Martinez asked. How do you feel about returning to classes knowing that justice is being served? Luis considered the question carefully. I feel responsible for making sure this doesn't happen to other students. If my documentation can prevent someone else from going through what I experienced, then it was worth it. The meeting concluded with Principal Martinez assuring Luis that the school would implement additional anti-harassment measures and that counseling support would be available for any student who needed it. As they left the office, Luis felt a weight lifting from his shoulders that he hadn't even realized he'd been carrying. In the hallway, they encountered Tyler's father, Robert Greaves, a large man in expensive suit who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. His face was flushed with anger and embarrassment. You, he said, pointing at Luis. You're the kid who's trying to ruin my son's future. Rico stepped forward, his posture subtly shifting into something more protective. Mr. Greaves, I presume? Your nephew is a troublemaker. Tyler was just being a typical teenager, and now his college prospects are ruined because some kid can't take a joke. Louis felt his uncle's hand on his shoulder again, steadying him. Sir, Rico said, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to command, your son systematically harassed my nephew for 3 weeks. He vandalized his property, used racial slurs, and created a hostile environment. These aren't jokes, they're crimes. He's just a kid. He's 17 years old, Rico interrupted. Old enough to understand the consequences of his actions. Old enough to know that targeting someone because of their race or background is wrong. Robert Greaves looked like he wanted to argue further, but something in Rico's steady gaze made him reconsider. This isn't over, he muttered. Yes, sir, it is, Rico replied calmly. Your son made his choices. Now he has to live with the consequences. As they walked away, Louis looked up at his uncle. Do you think I did the right thing? You did exactly what I taught you to do, Rico said. You identified the threat, you gathered intelligence, and you neutralized it using the appropriate channels. Most importantly, you did it without compromising your values or your character. The next morning, Louis arrived at school to find a different atmosphere. News of Tyler's suspension had spread quickly, and students looked at Louis with a mixture of respect and curiosity. In the hallway, he encountered Emma Dawson, who had been quietly documenting her own experiences with bullying. Louis, she said, approaching him with a shy smile. I wanted to thank you. For what? For showing me that fighting back doesn't always mean fighting. One submitted my own report to Principal Martinez yesterday about some things that happened to me freshman year. Louis nodded approvingly. Good. Everyone deserves to feel safe at school. There's something else, Emma continued. A group of us are starting a support group for students who've dealt with harassment. Ms. Redding is going to sponsor it. Would you consider helping us set it up? Louise considered the request. What would you need from me? Leadership, guidance. Someone who understands how to document incidents and work with the administration. Emma's voice grew stronger. Someone who can teach others how to stand up for themselves the right way. I'll think about it, Louis said, but Emma could see the answer in his eyes. During lunch, Louis sat with Marina and a growing circle of students who had gravitated toward his quiet confidence. The table that had once been a refuge for 2 outcasts had become a gathering place for anyone seeking genuine conversation over social posturing. You know, Marina said, watching Louis help a freshman with his homework, you've changed this place. How? So, people are different now. They're not afraid to be themselves. They're not afraid to speak up. She paused, choosing her words carefully. You didn't just beat Tyler, you changed the culture. Louis looked around the cafeteria, noting the different social dynamics. Students who had once huddled in isolated groups were mixing more freely. The rigid hierarchy that Tyler had enforced through intimidation was dissolving into something more fluid and inclusive. Maybe, he said quietly. But the real test will be whether it lasts. It will, Marina said with confidence, because you're not going anywhere. And you've taught people that they don't have to accept being treated badly. As if to prove her point, Marcus Williams approached their table. The basketball star had rarely spoken to Louise before, but now he carried himself with the respectful bearing of someone seeking advice. Louise, Marcus said, I heard about what you did, the documentation, the evidence. I'm dealing with some issues on the team, and I was wondering if you could help me figure out how to handle them. Louise gestured to an empty chair. Tell me what's happening. As Marcus began describing his situation, Louise felt a familiar sense of purpose settling over him. This was what Rico had been preparing him for, not just surviving adversity, but helping others navigate it as well. 3 weeks had passed since Tyler's suspension, and Jefferson Ridge High had settled into a new normal. The harassment incidents had dropped significantly, Not just because the primary perpetrator was gone, but because Luce's methodical response had sent a clear message. There would be consequences for targeting vulnerable students. Luis was organizing his locker after last period when he heard footsteps approaching. He turned to find Tyler standing in the hallway, looking smaller somehow without his usual entourage. The confident swagger was gone, replaced by something that looked almost like humility. "Can I talk to you?" Tyler asked, his voice lacking its usual aggressive edge. Lee studied him carefully, noting the changes. Tyler's posture was less confrontational. His eyes held a genuine uncertainty, and his hands were nervously fidgeting with his backpack strap. "All right," Louis said simply, closing his locker. They walked to an empty classroom, away from the curious eyes of other students. Tyler sat heavily in one of the desks, while Luis remained standing, his posture alert but not defensive. "I'm back on probation," Tyler said finally. "Community service, anger management classes, and I have to maintain a 3.0 GPA or I lose my spot on the team permanently." Louise nodded but said nothing. "My dad barely speaks to me," Tyler continued. "My college recruiters have stopped calling. My so-called friends ... He laughed bitterly. "Turns out they were only around when I was winning." "What do you want from me?" Lise asked, his voice neutral. Tyler looked up, and Lise saw something in his eyes that hadn't been there before: genuine remorse. "I want to understand how you did it. How you stayed so calm when I was ... He struggled for the words. "When I was being such a piece of shit to you." Luis pulled out a chair and sat down, recognizing that this was a moment that required careful handling. "You want to know how I controlled my anger? I want to know how you controlled everything. The situation, the people, the outcome." Tyler's voice carried a note of admiration. "You played chess while I was playing checkers. It wasn't a game." Louise said quietly, "It was survival. And I learned from someone who knows about survival. Your uncle. My uncle taught me that real strength isn't about dominating others. It's about controlling yourself." Louise paused, choosing his words carefully. "He taught me that the most dangerous person in any conflict is the one who can think clearly under pressure." Tyler was quiet for a long moment. "I couldn't think clearly. Every time you didn't react the way I expected, I got more frustrated, more angry. Why did you target me in the first place?" Tyler's face flushed with shame. "Because you were different. Because you were confident in a way I didn't understand. Because ... He stopped, struggling with the admission. "Because I was scared you'd show everyone that I wasn't as tough as I pretended to be." Louise felt a flicker of something unexpected, not quite sympathy, but understanding. "Fear makes people do stupid things." "It made me do terrible things," Tyler corrected. "The stuff I said about your father, the vandalism, I became someone I didn't recognize. And now? Now I'm trying to figure out how to be better. The counselor says I need to learn to channel my anger differently, to find healthier ways to deal with pressure." Tyler looked directly at Luis. "I was wondering if you could teach me." Luis was quiet for a long moment, considering the request. "Teach you what? How to be disciplined. How to think before acting. How to be strong without hurting people." "That's not something you learn in a few lessons," Luis said. "It's a way of life. It requires constant practice, constant self-awareness." "No, I'm willing to do the work." Tyler's voice carried a sincerity that Luis hadn't heard from him before. "I just need someone to show me how." Luis studied Tyler's face, looking for signs of deception or manipulation. He found only genuine remorse and a desperate desire to change. "My uncle runs a martial arts program for at-risk youth," Luis said finally. "It's not about fighting. It's about discipline, respect, and self-control. If you're serious about changing, I could talk to him about letting you join." Tyler's eyes widened. "You'd do that? After everything I did to you?" I do it because of everything you did to me, Luce replied. Because I understand what it's like to be angry and looking for a target. The difference is, I had someone to teach me a better way. I don't deserve your help. No, you don't, Luce agreed, but deserving it isn't the point. The point is whether you're willing to do the work to become someone who might deserve it someday. Tyler nodded slowly. I am. I want to be better than I was. Then we'll start tomorrow after school. Uncle Rico's gym is on 5th Street. Be there at 1600 hours. 1600? 4 o'clock, Luce translated with a slight smile. And Tyler? This isn't about forgiveness. This is about giving you the tools to make sure you never become that person again. I understand. As they left the classroom, Luce felt a sense of completion that he hadn't expected. The cycle of violence and retaliation had been broken, replaced by something more constructive. Later that evening, Luis sat in Rico's garage gym, wrapping his hands for their regular training session. The space was simple but functional heavy. Bags, mats, and the essential equipment for both physical and mental conditioning. You told Tyler he could join the youth program, Rico said, his tone neutral but questioning. I did. Was that wrong? Rico considered the question while adjusting the heavy bag. What do you think? Luis threw a series of measured punches, each one precise and controlled. I think that Tyler was dangerous because he had power without discipline. Taking away his power wasn't enough. He needed to learn discipline. And you think you can teach him that? I think we can teach him that. Together. Luis paused in his workout. You always said that the strongest person is the one who can help others become stronger too. Rico smiled, the expression transforming his usually stern features. Your father would be proud, Mio. Not just of how you handled Tyler, but of how you're handling Tyler's redemption. Do you think he can change? I think, Rico said, beginning to wrap his own hands, that people can change if they want to badly enough. And if they have the right guidance. 3 months later, Lou stood in the same garage gym watching Tyler work through a series of kata movements. The angry, aggressive teenager had been replaced by someone who moved with growing precision and control. Better, Louis said as Tyler completed the sequence. But remember, the power comes from here, he pointed to his chest. Not from here. He pointed to his fist. Tyler nodded, sweat beading on his forehead. I used to think power meant making people afraid of you. And now? Now I think it means not being afraid of yourself. Luis smiled and picked up his own training gear. Come on, let's work on your self-control. Rico's bringing in some new students next week, and I want you to help me teach them. As they began their training session, Luis felt the satisfaction of a mission truly completed. He had not only survived his encounter with Tyler Greaves, he had transformed it into something that would help others avoid the same cycle of violence and retaliation. Outside, the Texas sun was setting over Jefferson Ridge High, where a new generation of students was learning that true strength came not from domination, but from discipline, respect, and the courage to stand up for what was right. The lesson that began with a mocked accent had become something far more valuable, proof that the most powerful victories are won not through violence, but through the patient application of wisdom, courage, and the unshakable belief that everyone deserves the chance to become better than they were. In the end, Luis Santiago had done more than just survive high school. He had helped transform it into a place where strength was measured, not by who you could tear down, but by who you could help build up. Up next, we have 2 more incredible stories that are waiting for you. Just click the image you want to watch, and it will take you there. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to subscribe. It would mean a lot.